Welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck podcast. Today is Friday, January 19th, 2024. Joining me for today's podcast are, and we don't know where he is, but he might be calling in shortly, is John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. We've got Stewart who scribes for Popular Mechanics, AARP, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other fine publications, and Rob Pegoraro, who writes about tech developments at PC Mag, Fast Company, and other publications. Guys, how are you doing? How's life? What's going on? Stuart, I know you didn't go to CES. We're going to talk about CES, the podcast.
I'm being held hostage.
But in any event, Rob, you were out there, so we're going to have to use you as your kind of the person who was on site. I couldn't go because I had some family stuff going on. But before we jump into that, Stuart, there was a couple of topics you wanted to cover, if I recall.
For the first time in history, Apple passed Samsung as the world's leading cell phone maker or seller for 2023.
Yeah,
which is significant, and it's not significant. I mean, all this really shows is that Apple maintains its user base. I mean, I think their sales actually may have gone down for the year or been relatively flat. The problem is that Samsung is facing a huge amount of competition from other competitors such as Xiaomi and Oppo and Vivo. And Samsung doesn't have a huge presence in the largest market in the world, or the second largest market, depending upon which demographics you look at. In China, they don't really have a large place. So they've managed to maintain a very dominant first or second place position without having any kind of dominance in China. Right. So it's interesting. It's been covered a lot in the media. We're saying, oh, Apple's number one for the first time, but I don't think it really reflects the true nature of the market. I don't know that iOS is the leading operating system in the market. So I think it's a little bit misleading, but
it's not, because you've got to take Samsung and you've got to add the other non-iOS.
Sure, you had everybody else. iOS represents maybe 23% of the world's OS use, which is, again, also makes it funny that people are coming at them for antitrust things, considering they control only about 25%, less than 25% of the smartphone OS market.
Yeah, and we probably should do and maybe we'll do that next week, maybe a dedicated podcast just on Samsung itself, because I was at the Unpacked event a couple of days ago.
I watched it.
I was there live in the SAP Center where the San Jose Sharks play, and I don't want to turn this into a Samsung Unpacked podcast, but what was interesting, and what will be really interesting to see how Apple responds in June when they execute their WWDC event. 80% of the event was focused on AI, as you might expect, but on software. It was the first Samsung keynote or product presentation that I've ever been to that it was 36 minutes into the presentation before they talked about hardware.
Well, what was interesting to me was I was very impressed with what the phone can do.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just a little unsure of their marketing approach on this. There is still this divide in a perception of AI, especially in the world outside of the tech bubble. They already have a product called a smarter phone. Why didn't they simply call it a smarter phone? And here's what it can do. Oh, and it's enabled by AI instead of it's all AI. Oh, here's what it can do. And most of it is sales. Circle of search, very impressive. But why couldn't you show us an application that wasn't shopping?
Right. Yeah. Oh, you're such a sly one, Stuart. You're not reserved about your feelings. But in any event, we'll probably do a dedicated call on that. But before we go into the slides, Rob, before we go into the topics, talk a little bit about the atmosphere. I think I saw some numbers that they had about 130,000. They didn't quite get to 150,000.
135,000 was the most recent I saw. CES does an actual audit of attendance that comes out in like July or something. Given last year was 115,000 and 2022, the limping out of the pandemic year was like 44,000, and it was bizarro CES with no traffic whatsoever. Very strange. No, it was what I expected. It was its overwhelming sense. overwhelming self in the sense that by the time I finish reading everyone else's recaps of the show, I'm going to realize I missed approximately 36 hours of events at 500,000 square feet of exhibit space. And I'm going to wonder if I actually went to the same show because it remains so much to take in. And I now have 26 years of practice covering this firsthand. And I guess I still don't know what I'm doing there. There was so much state of the TV, electric vehicles, which at CES now means not just cars, but construction equipment and boats and whatnot.
John Deere, the
Mobility
whole
in
thing.
general.
Yeah, and I will say one thing as I bring up the topics here is that it was the first, I want to say my Lou Gehrig consecutive streak at 23 or 24 was broken because of a family situation. But the thing that was interesting, it was actually kind of liberating in a way, Rob, because I was able to actually sit in front of my computer, watch all these keynotes. And actually, in some ways, it was a little bit less stressful. You're not running around to meetings. I don't think I was any less productive because I did it behind a screen, but I wasn't going all to the crazy parties that you guys were going to. And I'm sure you were at all of them. I'm sure you were at every single party.
The ones I could stay up for.
So let's talk a little bit about services. I think this is not just a CES thing. This is obviously a macro thing that's been happening for a while. But AI. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I get bombarded on Facebook and on LinkedIn and other platforms, Reels, for example, with AI services. Hey, this new AI service can do this. This AI service can do that. So that's certainly happening at the cloud level. But Rob, since you were there on site, what's your perspective on the services piece specific to AI? Did you see a lot of the vendors that you met with or the booths that you stopped in kind of emphasizing that kind of capability?
All over the place. This is going to be a messaging and marketing problem. It just gets worse and worse because when everybody has AI and it's getting used to describe all these things, many of which are a long way from what you might think of by AI as a generative AI chatbot that talks back to you and sometimes makes up stuff. So put it this way, if you see a product pitch and it includes AI, replace it with software and see if you're equally impressed, because that's what a lot of it is. And there are some silly cases. Qualcomm had a demonstration of in-car connectivity where some of it was useful. If your car has a flat, it should be able to talk to either the fleet owner, if it's a rental car, or the car manufacturer, connect to the service network, tell you who can fix it, whatever, provide some data so the manufacturer knows if there's an issue they need to look at. That's great. But they also had an implementation in their concept car of an AI chatbot right in the dashboard, which you could do things like there was a Canadian in the car. So somebody asked the questions about Canada. I said, what should you eat in Canada? And it said poutine, maple syrup, and Canada Goose. Not a Canadian, but I don't think that's right. And it's just kind of silly. And this is probably distracting as well. I don't actually think you should be able to, another use case they had, talk to your in-dashboard AI, say, send a Christmas card to my friend and use Dolly to make it a picture of a rocket ship taking off over the Las Vegas Strip, which I actually heard is Las Vegas Straight, which doesn't exist. Another problem with that. It's kind of gimmicky. You need to think about where it's going to actually add value and do so in a way that it's not going to, make stories when it coughs up a wrong answer or send somebody down the wrong road or whatever. So, another example, TVs. You had Samsung talking about their AI upscaling. Well, upscaling is not new. They've been doing that ever since they started shipping 8K TVs and needed to have some way for people to watch something in close to that resolution when there's next to nothing available produced in that resolution. Right. So now it's not just upscaling, it's AI upscaling. LG, their TV processor also has AI in the name. And is it just a neural network? Is it machine learning? Is it just applying a large model to this? Or is it just kind of fancy software that's really good?
So Stewart, from your perspective, the AI, to me, the services part, where I know we're talking about AI services, but there's been kind of a fatigue with services and subscriptions that after a while, whether it's streaming content, now it's AI with multiple services you can subscribe to that do different things. then you have this other dynamic where there's a delineation between AI capability that's executed in the cloud, which is mostly the way ChatGPT and other applications work. You type in some level of text. There's maybe a couple of seconds delay, and it spits out something, whether it's an image. Rob was referring to Dolly, but then you've got companies like AMD. You've got companies like Intel that are now espousing AI on the device. And that's, by the way, that Qualcomm has been pushing that quite a bit for long. LLMs on from a local standpoint for the security advantages and privacy advantages. How do you assess the category right now? You think there's just a lot of confusion that consumers are not making that delineation? But give us your 2 cents.
Well, I think we're overthinking this a bit. Services is a category that's much larger than AI. I mean, we are essentially talking about something that the consumer electronics industry has been pursuing since its start in the 1920s, which is creating the true razor blade business model. Up until the last 5 or 10 years or so, we have been a products industry, and the services have been largely, quote unquote, farmed out. The VHS business these have all been separate companies. But now tech companies who make devices have finally figured out how to not only get you to pay for the device, but to pay to support that device. For instance, just yesterday, I got a notice from Apple that I was running out of iCloud storage. Would I like to increase my subscription to iCloud memory? So I up my subscription. That's a service. When you join any of these game clubs or streaming for PlayStation or Microsoft, PlayStation Plus, these are services. So the hardware companies have finally figured out how to get more money out of consumers other than simply paying for a low margin device on their part, and is beginning to provide a huge amount of revenue for them. I think that Apple's last report that almost a third of their revenue was from services, which is a huge change from just a few years ago when Apple's revenue was from 90% from devices. So Apple has led the way on this. Google has led the way on this. A huge part of Google's revenue is now coming from services. CTA is now starting to cite services in its annual revenue reports for the industry. And again, we're talking about a quarter to a third of industry revenue now coming from services. So I don't know that we're in the early stages of this, but I think it's become a fact of life.
Yeah.
And whether or not this is going to confuse consumers or not, I think consumers like the frog in the boiling water. I don't think that anybody has really noticed. And as long as we're getting something out of the services and willing to pay for them, this trend is only going to increase.
Well, keep in mind the example used with Apple is that Apple is kind of a unicorn in the fact that it has very nice margins on its hardware. Its hardware sales may be slowing, but they have the best of both worlds. They have high margins.
Sure, but they're still providing a template for everybody else, and Microsoft and everybody else is following in those footsteps.
Right. Any closing thoughts on this, Rob?
Yeah, everyone's realizing. I think it's pointing to also some weakness in the advertising business. Amazon, their big hope was that Alexa, this will be a form of marketing for us. People will buy more stuff through it. And of course that hasn't happened. So they're working on the Remarkable Alexa initiative, where you may get to pay for a super souped up version of the Amazon voice assistant. And I'm like, I'm not going to pay for that. I already pay Amazon Prime, the Amazon citizenship tax. So I don't need to have another fee I pay to that company.
Yes, and also remember that Google just announced a huge number of layoffs, a huge number of which come from their sales department.
Going to be interesting, but you're right. I think services are here to stay, whether they're AI or non-AI. They're not going away. Now, let's talk about this bread and butter category, TVs in the smart home. You can't go to CES without seeing some type of big, TV announcement, TV release. I did watch the TCL. I don't know if you were you at the event, the TCL event?
It was a TCL press conference, yeah.
Yeah, so I watched that online. A lot of this, to me, it's kind of rinse and repeat. High resolutions. They're still pushing 8K in a big way, and I know you, Rob, you have very profound feelings about 8K. They're not giving up. 8K is the future, and damn it,
Samsung especially, they will not let that go.
Yeah, no. So what was the 2 or 3 highlights from a TV perspective, Rob, that you kind of noticed at the show?
So the big takeaway I have from this for normal TV shoppers, not video files who can go into lots of detail about why, micro LED versus OLED, blah, 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 is if you're just looking to buy a TV, it's a great time to do it because the prices are getting so cheap. And when you see people putting so much of their sales pitches, devoting them to things like micro LED in the case of Samsung, or 8K, or anything that will inject some profit margin back into the business, that means the stuff that you want to buy is going to be free or nearly free. You can sink that money towards paying for all the services the rest of the tech industry wants you to buy.
Right.
Aside from that, yeah, the TV is obviously your streaming platform. I remain a skeptic that you want to have it as any sort of hub of the smart home, because that is something that is not going to get software updates for forever. And do you want that to then have access to your smart light bulbs, your thermostat, everything else? No, you don't. You want that to be in a smaller box or a tablet or whatever that you can readily replace and keep current with software.
Right. Mm-hmm. I agree. And by the way, that vision of the TV being the center of the smart home goes back, many years. I've never really been that thrilled about it, simply because of the downsides associated with it. And we're not, maybe during the 1950s and 1960s, the living room was kind of the place where the family met. That's completely changed with the mobile device. I don't think living rooms actually serve that purpose anymore. It's not grand central in the average American home anymore. But Stuart, what's your take? Did you say anything interesting online while you were watching the?
Well, the thing that struck me from all the TV manufacturers was everybody is juicing up their brightness. I think that, the big problem with OLED was always that you could only use it really in a dim or a dark room to get the best out of it. Same thing with projectors. But now everybody is juicing up the brightness, realizing that most people live in sunny rooms and watch TVs in sunny rooms, especially like if you have a football party. This is not exactly something you're doing in a darkened home theater room. So
Right.
That was the one thing that I noticed. The other thing on the home theater and the home central side is, I think the controls can stay in a separate box. I don't think consumers want their home control in the TV itself, but the TV serves as a very, very convenient monitoring station for the smart home, simply because in many ways it's more accessible than even your smartphone is, especially for older people, simply because they're going to be parked in front of the TV more than they are going to be parked in front of their smartphone. So for instance, if my doorbell rings, I would much rather get an alert on my TV and react to the TV than to have to scrounge around and find my iPhone to answer the damn door.
Right.
Just to be able to look at multiple cameras. If you
Look under the sofa cushions, it's always there.
Say that again.
Look under the sofa cushions. That's where your phone is.
Yes, but except the TV's right in front of me, I don't have to look for it. So I think the TV makes a very convenient monitoring point. You could view all of your cameras from there if you want to. I think the issue is simply making it easy enough to do that for general consumers, making sure that it's a 1 or 2 button thing. If the doorbell rings, there's a button on your remote control that says answer the door, that sort of thing. I think this is, if you watch For All Mankind, this is an engineering problem. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a behavioral problem. I think most people, if they were given the option, a lot of people would love to be able to answer their video doorbell from their TV instead of looking around for their smartphone.
Rob, did you get a chance to see that LG, I think it was called Transparent TV, a transparent display?
2 places. So the obvious thing was during their keynote and the entrance to their CES exhibit, they had this huge stack of, I think, 15 different transparent OLED TVs that they were turning from transparent to opaque, cycling through different patterns so you could briefly see through them to the rest of the exhibit, then see the highlight reel on it. And the other place, and this is CES in a nutshell, where I saw a transparent OLED screen was in the cabin of a battery electric front end loader from Bobcat, which is a subsidiary of the Korean conglomerate Doosan. And it was actually, work with me here, seemed practical in that you could use this to overlay like the misutility map of here's the gas line and the electric line. So you don't, cut through that or take out somebody's fiber internet with the blade of the loader. And I'm like, oh, that's actually legit useful, not just an excuse. How can we put some pointless technology in this piece of construction machinery? And so that's why I find CES fascinating. And I keep showing up even after 26 years. I should probably know better, because you see these weird interactions and collisions of this technology that you saw here winds up over here doing this thing nobody ever thought of at the start of it.
One last question for you on smart home before we move to our next topic. Matter, last year Matter was kind of sort of coming out. Was it visible? I mean, or do we give up on Matter? I mean, does Matter
There
not
were
matter anymore?
references to it in keynotes, mentions of it, but it was not, this is the hardware presentation. It was in no way core to the sales pitch. I think the visibility thing we've talked about last year, if you go to Amazon site or Best Buy site, will it let you say, only show me stuff that works with Matter? Last I checked, it did not.
Right.
I guess I found the same problem about TVs. There's the next gen TV broadcast standard, which gets you 1080p over the air. It can do UHD 4K if you clear out other stations, but good luck finding it if you don't specifically know to look for it, because Best Buy's site doesn't list them at all. There's no menu drop down to say only show me the TVs that can get these upgraded broadcasts. So you might buy one by accident and then discover you have this option if you plug in an antenna and see what you can get, but that's it.
Well, that's a shame. I feel like Matter has, it's not going away, obviously, but it sounds like their window of opportunity from a visibility standpoint has kind of petered out. So that's a shame. Our last topic is EVs. I know it's a fun topic for you, Rob. We'd like to get Stewart to kind of comment on that, but anything jump out at you?
So first of all, at CES was the range of EVs, not just cars, not just e-bikes, but I mean, these are the companies you now see showing up there. Caterpillar, which showed off a underground mine loader powered by batteries, which, looked very impressive. They had a sign, please do not try to climb onto it, which I'm sure the 10-year-old boy inside half the CES attendees was like, ooh, can I play with this? Electrifying things like construction is actually a good and practical thing to do, not least because diesel engines and things like backhoes are really, really loud and not great for the people who have to work on them all day. I mentioned boats. Brunswick Corporation was showing off all these add-on electric outboard motors you can use instead of a gas-powered one, which is great for pollution, or for less pollution, I should say. A lot of stuff going on there. I was just at the Washington Auto Show's Public Policy Day yesterday, where the feds were talking about, it's good to see them continuing to iterate. The thing they announced yesterday was almost $150 million in funding, not to build new chargers, but to take old ones that are around and broken and fix them, which, you've already run power to these things, crack them open, replace what needs to be fixed, put them back into service.
Right.
And that seems, to the extent that they're learning, they didn't talk so much about the progress of the $5 billion to fund high-speed charging networks on highways, because so little of those things have been built yet. But I do hope they are taking notes, seeing, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this other thing. Let's keep iterating. Let's keep this moving forward.
So Stuart, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit when it comes to EVs. I like to do that.
The guy who doesn't drive a car.
Yeah, I know.
You mean the New York City subway?
The perfect guy.
I don't drive the subway either. They drive me crazy, but I don't drive the subway.
No, but that's never stopped Stuart from having an opinion on something. So in any event, the observation, and I wrote about this about a week ago, is that, and it's kind of surprising, EVs right now, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I get this feeling that there's a perception right now that it's it's lost a little bit of its luster. You've got a lot of dealers with, they're sitting on cars. Over just the last 2 or 3 weeks, some really negative press has been generated with the situation in Chicago, where there were, and it was primarily Tesla, I believe, because Tesla has a lot of superchargers in different locations. People could not access the EV chargers in public places because the weather unduly affected those. Now, yes, there are ways to solve that, but what drives me crazy about the whole EV category is that it was kind of like, let's bet the entire house and try to move the entire automotive industry to EVs in 35 minutes rather than, and this is the question I have for you, Stewart, would the industry been better off, and would the green movement in general been better off making a stronger dedication to hybrids, because you don't have to change the infrastructure? It kind of gets, it's not, obviously it's not completely a carbon footprint free vehicle, but they're more affordable. The cost gap between a hybrid and a non-hybrid is $4,000 or $5,000 generally. So do you think the industry kind of goofed up by trying to bet the farm on going right to EVs rather than taking a stutter step and say, you know what, we've got these hybrids and they might be more appealing to consumers?
Fortunately, we live in a capitalist country, which is ruled by the law of supply and demand. Companies are going to make money. The car makers are going to try to make money any way they can. And if they think that they can make more money, and if the consumers are demanding the product, they will make them and they will sell them. We live in that environment. Nobody is really mandating anything except for California, which is mandating the end of all solely gas-powered vehicles. I don't know that hybrids are included in that or not. But I keep drifting back into consumer electronics history and the evolution of certain products. The first color TV was introduced in 1954. It took 13 years for the three major networks to convert their entire primetime lineup
to color.
So in those intervening 13 years, there were all sorts of noises from every aspect of the industry and society about color standards, which RCA usurped after they were turned down, to the size of the TVs, to the cost of the TVs, the cost of production by Hollywood, whether they wanted to do it or not. I think that we are sort of in that same slog now, where there's going to be this intervening period between the introduction of an advanced technology, which clearly has benefits, despite the fact that batteries don't run well in low temperatures,
right.
Which, if anybody didn't know that, they're not paying attention, to their more or less universal acceptance. And it took 13 years till the prime time lineup to get all color. It took another 5, 6, 7 years for color TVs to outsell black and white TVs.
Right.
So we're in that same sort of technology advancement adoption slog. And so I think we're in the middle of it now. We're at the stage where color TVs are still very expensive. They're not as big as the black and white TV. There's not enough there's not enough programming for them, metaphorically speaking. In this case, not enough chargers. I think that all of this will change in the capitalistic society as more governments try to move people to electric, as infrastructure builds out, as the car makers realize or not that they can make more money with electric or hybrids than the other way. They will make the decisions that benefit their bottom lines, essentially. And the government will do whatever it needs to do to protect its citizens and to provide for its citizens. And I think that is simply watching how color TV evolved is similar, not exactly the same, but similar to how the EV car movement is moving.
Yep. Remind me, if we ever do a screenplay on Adam Smith, you're the guy we're going to call.
My hand is not invisible.
So, Robert, wouldn't be fair for me, before we kind of sign off the podcast, I want to ask you that question. We were talking about that a bit before.
I can speak to this, number one, because we've had a Prius since 2005. It is well maintained, although it's not as clean as it used to be. So we started the hybrid experiment a long time ago. Toyota put the first Prius on sale in the 20th century. It seems like a newer thing because some automakers, Stellantis comes to mind, GM, when they spent all these years talking about flex fuel cars, were very slow to pick up on that. But in fact, hybrids are a great bridge technology. Now, all that said, although this well-maintained Toyota is probably due for replacement, I don't want to replace it this year because on the one hand, waiting until next year or the year after that ensures that all the manufacturers will be shipping cars that use the Tesla-designed North American Charging Standard Connector, or SAE J3400, if you want to use the standards body's term for it. Number two, there should be a much wider selection of EVs that qualify for the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits because of where they're sourced, where the batteries are sourced from. I have spent so many years of my life being other people's beta tester. I'm happy to let other people be my beta tester when it comes to the very large purchase of an electric vehicle. And there's lots of other things we can electrify in the meantime. And so, yeah, like I personally would not be surprised to see the growth of sales drop a little bit. Last year, they still increased by about 50% compared to 2022, which is, not my idea of a slump. But yeah, right now we have the short-term effect of there's a switch in the connector standard. The tax incentives don't line up quite as much. Although I noticed Hyundai, instead of their cars don't qualify for the IRA credit, so they'll just give you a $7,500 rebate, the same thing anyways, to get the car off the lot. That's capitalism at work. So, yeah, I love what Stewart said about the adoption of color TV and how these things. It's not necessarily the sort of classic boom hockey stick adaptation. The hockey stick has bumps or it has chips. I don't know. I don't play hockey, so I don't know what the term is. So yeah, we progress in fits and starts.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to end it there, but my just closing comment. I just think that consumers, especially people who buy cars every few years. Many people, when they buy a car, they don't replace it for many, many years. The cost of maintenance, the cost of gasoline is a factor. And I just really think that hybrid cars would have been an easier sell, for many people, rather than, it goes to the whole supply and demand observation that Stewart adroitly made. But I just think that at the end of the day, I think trying to jerk the market and artificially move the market from A to B, it can have consequences. And that's why I think you're seeing some of those things happening right now in the marketplace. But in any event, guys, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these on-screen QR codes to connect with me. You can also follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week. And thanks again, guys.
Thank you.